Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, December 5th, 2022. Time for another week. Time for another week of shows. Time for another week, another show, another week of shows. More. Basically, what it means is we have some work ahead of us, and that's fine. Monday, good day for the start of the week. I like to keep them at the beginning of the week. I don't know about you. Pretty good. Good fit. All right. Everything okay? No, of course not. All sorts of chaos here today. I don't want to alarm anybody. We are out of corn dogs. It's like that scene in Airplane, Also, we're out of coffee. Panic in this house. If you knew, listeners who are either perpetually at the Iowa State Fair or preparing lunch in this household for the high schooler know what kind of panic that's going to induce. Probably most people wouldn't, but it's not good. They're not like great for you or anything, but these are like a staple fallback in the diet here for some reason. I don't know why. I never liked them. I think they're horrible, but these are a fallback. Now, there's all sorts of other good stuff packed in that lunchbox too. And we're talking about a high schooler with a lunchbox and everything, and that's what I do. Well, I'm supposed to be getting ready for the show. I run around slicing up apples and filling the little baggies, reusable Ziploc baggies we have now, by the way. They're real fun, and I like spending my time washing those. Ugh. All right, planet. I hope you appreciate it. Anyway, in the meantime, we're taking from you your apples and carrots, which go every day with lunch in a big bottle of water. So there's good, healthy stuff that goes with them, too. And then this corn dog, which is apparently just the cornerstone of his diet for some reason. And there should be better things, and he should like tastier things. He's very into cooking and food and stuff. I don't know why the comfort food is corn dogs, so that's the way it is. Anyway, somehow we managed to run out without noticing yesterday, or I guess last Friday, and the bus is coming, and I don't have anything else to offer you, but, they sell lunch every day at school, and actually twice last week he got there. Then he's got a new habit, which is to say, I actually like what they're selling better, or I don't have time for lunch today. I'm working on something that's due in class in 10 minutes, and I eat everything else, but I leave the corn dog. So, they don't always get eaten. Anyhow, what a tragedy we have before us today. Other news, things that affect maybe millions of other Americans or people around the world instead of this. The numbers are still creeping upward here in Loudoun County with respect to the coronavirus infections being reported anyway. We're up over into the 70s, whereas a couple weeks ago we were flirting with 30s and heading downward. It's 70-plus cases a day. Nothing huge to worry about, but I did see something this morning on Mastodon, where I'm reading all my news and everything, that while cases are staying flat, deaths plummeting, thank God, from COVID-19, hospitalizations somehow ticking their way back up again, I guess, as we find vaccine and other treatment-resistant variants, etc., making for slightly more serious disease when people do pick it up. So, keeping an eye on that. Also, other emergencies that haven't ended. The former president of the United States called for termination of the Constitution over the weekend, so that's bad. There might be something to discuss there. We'll see whether that's of interest to anybody. Other things that happened over the weekend. Well, let's see. People continue migrating to Mastodon. There's some huge Supreme Court cases up this week that might also undermine or eliminate large swaths of the constitutional order as we know it, putting Republican-dominated state legislatures in sole control of everything that happens in the United States of America, legislatively, electorally, etc., with no recourse whatsoever to anyone, anywhere. Just so terminating the Constitution, that's kind of bad. Republicans more or less refusing to condemn this. That's also not so great. so there's a lot going on and a lot to catch up on. Greg Dworkin is scheduled to be with us because it's a Monday, and he loves to come by on Mondays and remind us of all the things that we may have either ignored or stewed in over the weekend, depending on what kind of listener you are. And I don't mean to continue paying undue attention to the Twitter, Mastodon, whatever other social media drama that's going on over there, but I do find that it's still not a place, and I think this is, Greg will probably agree, he's still getting the bulk of his news gathering done at Twitter. I've been mostly ignoring what's going on there. So, the good news is I haven't seen this toxic environment that people are complaining about that Elon Musk is facilitating. I'm sure it's there. I tried to, avoid it when he didn't own the site, and I'm not doing anything special to immerse myself in it now. But it creates a little extra work for gathering the news, even though, a president calling for the abandonment of the Constitution does seep through even on Mastodon. So, all right. Good morning, Greg. How you doing minus the Constitution thing?
Good morning. So the actual words that he used were termination. People are being nice to him and say suspension, but that's not really what he said. I didn't count, but he basically used 88 words to say it.
Oh, well, that's a good number. They 14 is another fun number for them. Very into numerology for people who don't like Kabbalah.
Right,
much,
or
okay.
I Ching. But,
that too.
The two big stories, I think, today, actually there's three. There's, of course, the Georgia runoff, so I don't want to forget about that.
Well, that's tomorrow, so we can, we can focus on that later.
But it's the big story until we get the results.
That's right.
So
especially
it's a story
in
today,
Georgia.
it's a story tomorrow, it'll be the story Wednesday.
Getting rid of my emails will be a story as well.
Yeah, and I will stop getting texts asking me for money, so
Right.
that's good.
Very exciting.
The other two stories, though, of course, the Hunter Biden laptop fiasco.
Oh, right.
And, Donald Trump's relationship with the Constitution, which isn't a positive one.
Right. Oh, and, minor terrorist attack as well, North Carolina.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Some terrorists tried to take down the electrical grid at the same time that some terrorists were trying to take down the Ukrainian electrical grid.
Yes, it's a big thing about electrical grids that people have, and it would be weird if there was a similar group of people or people who colluded on such projects.
It would be weird if there were no connection whatsoever.
Right.
But let's start with the Hunter
electricity.
Biden laptop. I think there's a couple of good threads on this on Twitter, which you can't find anywhere else, and also some stories which you can find on elsewhere than the Bird site.
All right.
So let's start with Nicholas Grossman at Arc Digital. Another hyped Hunter Biden laptop reveal flops.
It's very exciting to people on the right, this laptop.
It is very exciting to people on the right for
know
reasons which are obscure, but I think that Dave Karff in a Twitter thread really explains that, so I'll do that next.
all right.
But first, let's just outline the issue.
Oh, yes.
Another hyped
hell's
Hunter
going on
Biden
here?
laptop reveal flops. Elon Musk and Matt Taibbi. This is the good part about it. Matt Taibbi isn't a journalist. He's an internet troll. And so this sort of highlights the fact that that's what he is. We don't call Glenn Greenwald a journalist anymore. He's not. He's also an internet troll. And they basically fall in the same bucket. So in advance of the release, MIT computer scientist and Musk booster Lex Fridman called it historic and claimed it would straighten our democracy because transparency helps keep people honest and minimize undue influence from politics and money. Keep an eye on this whole transparency thing because we're going to have some stuff to say about that as well. But selectively releasing internal information without external oversight is not transparency, especially not when attempting to support a preconceived narrative. The public knows this is a fraction of Twitter's internal documentation, but doesn't know what they chose to hold back and for what purpose. Taibbi said he had to agree to certain conditions to review what Musk showed him, but didn't say what those were. Basically, to me, what he was doing is negotiating on how much I'm going to get paid to pretend that I'm being objective.
Oh.
The release was a marketing gimmick, and if you feel otherwise, tell us exactly everything. That's transparency. The release was a marketing gimmick, and the inaccurate claim of transparency is another. Basically, you have to liken this to having a campaign release an internal campaign poll one day before tomorrow's election, showing that, for the sake of argument, Herschel Walker is only down by 1.
Okay.
In your internal campaign poll.
I see. So you're trying to tell a story,
but
set a narrative.
You didn't mention the fact that the other 7 polls that you have in your campaign, some from different pollsters, are showing you down anywhere between 5 and 8 points. You only show the one that is -1, and then call it transparency. And everybody looking at the whole range of things that could have been published says, no.
Okay.
So you can't have selective Matt Taibbi reading of what Elon Musk decided to show him, which is essentially that Twitter decided they didn't really want the New York Post story about the Hunter Biden laptop, which was the only major outlet that ran with it. They didn't want it on Twitter. So they censored that. They censored a bunch of other things, including a bunch of Hunter Biden dick pics.
Oh.
So they wouldn't allow any of that stuff on. And somehow or other, that's supposed to be a scandal. And what
having
Dave
it on is a scandal
writes about it, which I think really is much more relevant and to the point, is he says, look, the thing to understand about the Hunter Biden laptop story was that it was supposed to be the Trump campaign's October surprise. This was October 2020. Mainstream media and social media were supposed to take the bait and focus on the appearance of scandal for the last weeks of the election. They didn't take the bait. The New York Post story was shunned. Social media platforms treated it as manufactured propaganda with questionable sourcing. And conservative elites have been pissed ever since. They're supposed to be these brilliant media manipulators. Roger Stone and Steve Bannon and the rest of the Pepe Patrol pretend at being these incredibly sophisticated actors injecting precision memes to bend the public will, but they're actually just blunt instruments. Trump got impeached the first time for trying to condition congressionally approved military aid to Ukraine on Zelensky announcing an investigation of Biden corruption. He wanted the appearance of corruption so we could wrap the media's attention around it. And the laptop was basically plan B. They wanted everybody to freak out. Remember, this is a Rudy Giuliani invention. They wanted everyone to freak out about it for weeks, for a few weeks. Normally what happens is conservative media shouts about it. Mainstream media genuflects and covers the controversy. And Baden and company high-five each other for setting the agenda, but it didn't work this time, and they've been pouting ever since. It's a lot like the kid who loses a video game and starts slamming the controller, insisting it's rigged or the system is cheating. It's not fair. The plan was supposed to work. And it would have worked if it weren't for you meddling kids.
But, yeah, I mean, so
Musk and Taibbi are tapping into that well of resentment. And basically, that's why the right wing is so fixated on not just the Hunter Biden laptop, but Twitter's current reveal, which isn't much of a reveal of anything. Why should we care about the president's adult fail son who doesn't work in the administration? That's why I called my pundit roundup today, Impeach Hunter Biden and other stories.
Yeah, okay.
2 years later, what's the scandal supposed to even be? The media didn't take the bait, no fair. That's the scandal. They're going to keep bitching about this for years. It's going to be louder and emptier than Benghazi. The scandal is that their clever propaganda efforts sank like a lead balloon, and that has to be somebody else's fault, and that's it. That's the whole thing.
I see. So I guess they thought it would be scandal enough in itself that there was these weirdo pictures on his laptop, but then nobody cared. So the reason, I guess the new scandal is nobody cared because Twitter told them not to care about it.
Yeah, exactly.
Huh. Well,
so there were 2 revelations regarding Hunter Biden. The most relevant one is no evidence of any government involvement in the laptop story. Taibbi found federal law enforcement had contacted Twitter months before the New York Post article with a general warning about possible foreign hacks, but nothing about Hunter Biden, let alone a specific story.
Okay.
These non-specific keep an eye out warnings have been standard procedure for years and issued to many companies. Facebook got one too, especially after North Korea hacked Sony in 2014.
Oh, yeah.
And Russia hacked the Democratic National Committee in 2016.
Didn't forget about
Remember Hillary's recipes. Very important stuff. So that's right.
Yes.
The big reveal blindly hyped as evidence of a political scandal showed the opposite. Released communications feature senior Twitter officials, including then head of legal policy and trust, Vijay Gaddy and Deputy General Counsel Jim Baker disagreeing about what to do and making a judgment call to block the Post story due to suspicion it contained hacked materials, a violation of established policy. Taibbi's been trying to spin Twitter and Facebook's reaction to that Biden laptop story as a political scandal for more than 2 years. If there's even a hint of evidence implying government officials were involved, he would have highlighted it. But that's the dog that didn't bark. It's missing because it's not there.
Okay.
The other Hunter Biden revelation in the Twitter files, so-called Twitter files, is that somebody from the Biden campaign spotted naked pictures of Hunter and asked Twitter to take him down, and Twitter did. That's it. That's the entire story.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, like, I didn't want to see those.
There's no there kind of thing.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, I guess the idea is, well, people should be scandalized by these pictures, so we need you to circulate them. And they said, we don't want that on our
Right. And Grossman
servers.
also goes on to say, look, people invested in this Hunter Biden thing are going to find something to be scandalized about.
Yeah, I guess
But
that's
remember,
really
this
it.
is all set up by Rudy Giuliani.
Well, he's very
And
smart.
Wait, there's more in terms of analysis of what happened and what should have happened. And this comes from a data expert. And he also was on Twitter with a nice little thread. His name is Jake Williams, otherwise known as Malware Jake.
What does he do with his spare time? Okay.
Right. What he's talking about is
What are you talking
exactly
about?
what happened. And this was from December 3rd, so this goes back a couple of days.
Woo,
And he says,
too.
regarding the Hunter Biden forensic analysis.
Forensic. If there's a forensic in the sentence, I think these days it's garbage. But okay, yeah.
Pretty much, yeah.
Forensic
You know, I hear
analysis.
forensic analysis and I
Right.
think, Dan Rather's looking at the typewriter
I think
that wrote
cyber
the George
ninjas.
W. Bush memo about
Right,
whether
right.
or not he actually flew a plane
Okay.
in the National Guard. Right. Regarding the Hunter
true.
Biden forensic analysis, I personally am not a fan of the fact that it took so long to get an independent analysis of the data. I wish the evidence had been made available without strings to reputable media organizations in 2020, and it wasn't. The relevant parts about this are his describing what happened in 2020 in terms of other media besides the New York Post deciding to or not to pay attention to this. When political operatives shop evidence of a bombshell story weeks before an election, but dictate publication timelines as a condition of providing the evidence, skepticism is fully warranted, and that's what Giuliani did.
Okay. I understand
Publishing
that.
without validation in that case is journalistic misconduct, in my opinion. Whether you agree with what Twitter did in suppressing the story is a separate issue from the integrity of the evidence. Anybody discussing the New York Post story without acknowledging evidence was manipulated before being passed to the New York Post is being disingenuous. As reported, the evidence I analyzed for the Washington Post back in the day, that's what he was doing,
does? Okay.
was definitely manipulated before it got to me. I have no knowledge of what the FBI has or how it might differ from what I analyzed. And the line between manipulated and fabricated is razor thin in so many cases, especially cases like these where the stakes are so high. So I legit do not understand people want to claim other news outlets should have run this story without validation. So the Post ran it without validation, in other words. Another news story, other news outlets looked at it and said, I'm not sure about this.
Mm-hmm.
As
And
I see
that's the
it,
grievance.
there are many issues being discussed today. Was Twitter's censorship consistent with its own policies? Are Twitter's policies on censoring hacked material appropriate? How much validation should be performed by media outlets before publication? Does the magnitude of this story change the standard? Does the source? What if you discover evidence has been modified prior to receiving it? Do you have a duty to report? Can others independently validate the evidence? I'm sure there's nuance that I didn't capture beyond that. But my opinion about Twitter's policies don't really matter. I'm just focusing on evidentiary questions. We know for a fact the evidence was modified. That's not up for debate. It also wasn't broadly available for validation. This goes back to what we were talking about in terms of Mike Taibbi. We know what Elon Musk showed him. We don't know what Elon Musk didn't show him. There's no way to know. You can't validate it. So you can't look at this and say, okay, any objective person would come to a certain conclusion. You can't possibly come to a conclusion when you don't know what you haven't been shown.
Okay. I mean, I get that part.
Right? So Jake Williams goes on to say, I wouldn't take seriously any media outlet that chose to publish a story of this magnitude without validation. In other words, Rudy Giuliani writes you and says, I have information on this laptop, and I'm not going to send you the laptop. I'm not going to send you what's on the laptop. I'm going to send you a PDF of what's on the laptop, which was written at a different time, and you're to take my word for it that that's what's on there, and you can't publish it until a week before the election.
Yeah, that doesn't...
I mean, that's basically what happened. I may have gotten some of those details wrong, but that's essentially what happened at the time.
Okay.
And most news organizations said, yeah, no, we can't do this.
Right. Well, Rudy...
And the New York Post said, oh, we'll do it.
Pretty obvious. Okay, well, that's the New York Post for you.
So, Jake Williams says, unless you're an editor of a major publication, which I am not, you're unqualified to dictate how publications should report a story like this. And getting it wrong will cost advertising dollars, possibly jobs, most likely your own, not to mention your duty to the public. And I would probably add that I very publicly offered to validate the evidence in 2020 for the New York Post pro bono as a public service, being a data expert. Immediately after their publication, they never contacted me and, to my knowledge, never published any details of any other validation. So, whatever.
Okay. Well, that does say something. Not interested in a free validation. Or for parking or of the story they had been running.
Right. So, the point is, I think Karp has it right in terms of the motivations of bringing it up now, and I think Jake Williams had it right about the motivations. We're not talking about it then. And so it's a non-story, but non-story with explanation.
I guess. Interesting.
Well, they're winning because we're talking about it. Actually, no. We're talking about them being fools, so no.
Right.
That doesn't mean that
we are leaving
any more than it means
as well.
That Donald Trump is winning because you're paying attention to him because he said he was going to terminate the Constitution. Well, Donald Trump is winning because he had dinner with Ye and Nick Fuentes, manipulated by Milo Yiannopoulos, and so he's winning because we mentioned all of those things. No.
No, but we finally did get around to Milo Yiannopoulos. So it's an element that's been missing to the story, and because
nobody really knows what his role is. I thought he was maybe at dinner, but one of my journalist friends said absolutely he wasn't, checking with sources.
Interesting.
He was a advisor to Ye in terms of Kanye West, the artist formerly known as Kanye West.
I know. I'm not certain
in terms of political direction.
Yeah.
He is, in fact, one of the worst people on the planet. But what actual role he has, what relationship he has to Trump, who cares about him, I mean, these are all questions other people can answer.
It's very interesting. He's trying very hard to get into this story, and it seems like he might have had a role in it, but you have to wonder every time you see, whenever you see the word forensic, whenever you see the name Milo Yiannopoulos, and he's explaining how he's related to a story, you have to wonder whether that's really true.
Yes. As a matter of fact, I'll just tell you right now, without validation, and so you should just go ahead and run with this, that I am the strategic genius behind Ralph Warnock's win tomorrow.
Oh, okay. Well, congratulations. Good job.
Prove it.
Minus the emails.
Prove it wasn't.
Oh,
Prove it's not true.
Well, I don't know. My email volume is way up.
Because I have all sorts of things I've said about that election, and it's right there on Twitter, so clearly...
We'll have to take your word for it at this point.
Yeah, well, pretty much. I mean, I'm obviously making a ridiculous claim that cannot be validated, but you can't just run with this stuff because somebody says something.
Yeah. I don't know what's going on outside my house right now, but I think it's War of the Worlds. A large Martian machine.
Which world?
Presumably...
Is it Venus or Mars?
We're losing, whatever this noise is. Wow. I'm not certain what's going on, but okay. Well, at any rate, we'll just talk right over it, and we'll pretend it's outside of some other listener's house.
Yeah. Anyway,
Mighty OCD, this is your fault. Yes. You got other stories?
I got plenty of other stories. But,
okay. This one machine is ruining it all.
Are you done with Hunter Biden? You got any more questions about Hunter Biden?
Do I have questions
that we can't answer and don't want to?
No, I don't think so. I mean, so far, it's still, they couldn't make anything out of his business relationships.
But
then it got to naked pictures. I think
this is the Billy Carter of stories, and somehow or other, the Republicans and the conservatives and the right wing are really pissed off that we're not making more of it than it is.
Well, naked people are very upsetting to them. I understand that. even though they constantly are taking pictures of themselves naked. I mean, don't forget that, what was Joe Barton, the chairman of the Energy Committee, and, longtime Republican ultra-conservative, was basically doing the same thing with his computer equipment that they say Hunter Biden was doing, and nobody wanted to see those pictures either. And I can't imagine that if anybody had hacked his phone and decided to put them on Twitter, the Twitter would have been like, nah, everybody needs to see the chairman of the Energy Committee's privates. That's, as I understand it, that's the issue, is that they were non-consensually posted and they're stolen pictures, and that's a violation of the Twitter terms of service. And I guess the Republicans are moaning and groaning because they're so conservative. They need to see naked pictures. You know how it is.
Well, again, that circles around. So why is this a scandal again?
Yeah, I mean, I guess so. And remember that
that's a Twitter scandal, not a Hunter Biden scandal.
And it's not even that, because as I understand it, the Twitter policy was aimed at eliminating the market on Twitter anyway for what they call revenge porn. Stolen naked pictures of other people you want to target.
This is part of cancel culture? Is that what they're trying to say?
Yes, I don't really even know, but this is a Twitter rule that's supposed to protect mostly girls from having private photos stolen and published on the web by vindictive boys that they wouldn't go out with or no longer go out with, and it's a horrible thing. And
I'll let Quinta Jurasek have the last word.
All right.
She basically said there's a term for this in business, which is not worth repeating. Oh. But the point is, you can't have a story that's too complicated and nobody cares and make something out of it.
That's a pretty good explanation, and then it fit in about 5 seconds, too. All right, we'll be back in 2 minutes, and hopefully the Martian machine will have moved on. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, the same guy who was just talking to you a second ago. Our Patreon subscription drive is still going strong, with over 175 monthly donors who help keep us on the air. If we've helped keep you going during the pandemic, why not return the favor and help us keep going so we can all be together for the next disaster? Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it easy to make secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for keeping you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Leaf Blower Radio. Apparently, it's a leaf blower. Several gas-powered leaf blowers, which I think are the worst things in the world for the environment, as I understand, working outside. And one of them, somebody just put on the ground and walked away from, I think, unless, I told Greg what was going on during the break, and he got sucked into it and either fired into the pile of leaves or another dimension or something, but we don't have that many leaves. This guy should have moved on a few minutes ago.
Yeah, around here.
Wow.
If you hear noises outside, you don't know what it is, chances are it's the power utilities taking down trees or blowing leaves or doing something. Because that's what happens this time of year.
Yeah, I mean, leaf blowing is not out of the ordinary, but I've never...
Industrial strength leaf blower here.
Yeah, and they don't just leave it on the ground and walk away.
Over Maryland, so that you don't have to deal with them.
That is possible from where we are. Like seeing Russia from Sarah Palin's house, you could get that done.
Anyway, Quinta Jurasek, I found the quote, and I have a story to tell you because it's sort of funny.
Yeah,
what she wrote was, Republicans attempting to revive the Hunter Biden laptop are struggling with what's known in the business as the Gorpman-Bleemer problem. I.e., it's way too complicated and only weirdos care. And I saw that and laughed and said, okay, after finishing laughing, because it's true, that's the whole Hunter Biden.
Yeah,
that's cares.
It's distilled nicely.
The word Gorpman and Bleemer.
Yeah,
and
is that
this
real?
New Republic piece has it.
Huh.
Bombshell, impeachment hearings destroy Gorpman and Bleemer.
Are they real?
The complexity of investigating Trump, lampooned in a legendary piece of satire, has been rendered moot, and it's not even Sunday. Whatever, there's a new development in the Ukraine scandal. I think of two names, Gortman and Bleemer. Neither of them belongs to a real individual. They instead come from an article published almost a year ago by Clickhole, the satirical website founded by The Onion that mocked the most feverish coverage of the Russia investigation. The day is just getting started, and the Trump House of Cards is already crumbling, said the article. This morning, special counsel Robert Mueller dropped a legal bombshell on the administration by filing court documents announcing a plea bargain with Trump's confidant lawyers, friend's associate, Gortman, and Gortman's testimony could spell major trouble for Bleemer, which must be terrifying for Trump. It goes on to list a bunch of other individuals in possible jeopardy, including Feldermeyer, Brensler, Thranghorst, and even Galloway.
Throw Mangrove. Okay.
While the article has since been mysteriously deleted, it might well be one of the most quietly influential writings of the Trump era. Gortman and Bleemer became bywords among journalists and commentators for a few intertwined phenomena: the struggle to keep track of the countless threads in the Trump-Russia saga, the challenge of giving proper weight and context to new developments. You can see why this relates to Hunter Biden. And the hyperbolic coverage embraced by some outlets along the way. Chatter about the Clickhole article resurfaced as the Ukraine scandal grew, with 2 weeks of public hearings now complete. However, our great national Gortman-Bleemer problem appears to be solved.
Hey. Wow.
Right?
They have their own lingo.
That's who Gortman and Bleemer are, and that's the relevance to this discussion. It's actually pretty funny. But yeah, trying to make something of it. And then I can't even remember the phrase Al Gore used in the W debate when he brought up some obscure policy. Well, what about, and like nobody knew what he was talking about, which didn't help him win the election.
I don't know. It sounds very much
vaguely familiar.
I mean, like, it sounds like an Al Gore thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, what the name of the thing was that he was referring to, that I can't bring that to mind. But okay, I get you. But certainly policy wonkery in general, policy or scandal wonkery is equally distracting and stupid and inscrutable to most people, I guess. And so there they are, trying to make a thing out of Hunter Biden, and everybody just, I mean, I guess at this point he's sort of synonymous with, I don't know, they're saying something bad about something that he did, and no one knows exactly what it is, but it's just not quite sticking.
Right, exactly.
All right. Well, too bad. They can, I guess they'll continue to try to make something of it. And I don't think that anybody believes that this is what the purchase of Twitter was all about, but Elon Musk is sort of reveling in the idea that now he gets access to this treasure trove of data and documents. He, along with right-wing conspiracy theorists, are pretty sure that, I guess maybe, there are documents in the basement somewhere that prove things like, we were all being shadow banned after all, whatever they thought that was, that their posts were being suppressed somehow.
This is really cute stuff. And so the only thing to really keep an eye on are the media outlets that try to pretend that somehow or other this is a legitimate area of discourse.
Yeah,
yes, there were many questions that made us not want to talk about Hunter Biden back in October of 2020, but Twitter's brought this up, and so here are some of the issues that remain unresolved.
Yeah.
There's nothing to this story. You shouldn't even be covering it. Well, that's suppression of information.
Right.
No, it's because it's not interesting.
I get it, and I mean, I guess I can't begrudge some dummy somewhere spending. And so,
that's why we decided to cover it on Daily Kos, because in the fun around it, because there was just so much crap out there talking about it. Might as well talk about it. I had a picture of Hunter Biden at the top. It said Hunter Biden, President of the United. Wait, he has no official office, does he?
No.
So move on. Then we have this other story here. Dear Merriam-Webster, says Bill Gruskin, we may need a new definition for moderate, and that's because Ben Siegel reports on This Week ABC leading GOP moderate Dave Joyce didn't rule out supporting Trump, this is on Stephanopoulos' show on Sunday, as the GOP 24 presidential nominee, despite his call to suspend the Constitution. He actually said terminate, not suspend, but that's okay.
Yeah, that's the only mistake that he made.
He kept being asked by Stephanopoulos, who's great on this.
I was worried that he was not going to be great.
Wait a minute. So despite Trump's feelings about the Constitution, you would still support him? Well, you have to understand, said Joyce, Trump isn't the nominee. There's many other people who might be, and Stephanopoulos said, that's not my question. My question is, if he's the nominee, are you going to support him, given his stance on the Constitution? And he repeated that 5 or 6 times in terms of Joyce's try to weasel out of the answer. And Joyce was floundering because, like, how do you address this?
Right.
And, and if that's your view, how are you a moderate?
That also is, that's the upshot of the whole thing. Yeah, there's no way to answer that question. I was pleased to finally see the clip. I was worried just seeing, stills of the clip, like, oh no, Stephanopoulos, first of all, said suspension and not termination. Okay. It could be viewed as it's normalizing language to say suspension rather than, even that's not very normal, by the way. But he actually did a fairly good job with it. And I was worried that he, didn't press hard. How could you not get him, grill him, rake him over the coals? He does. It's just Joyce doesn't give a real answer. So, and eventually, I hate, we all hate when they say, well, we have to move on, or that's all we have time for. If the guy's going to spend 20 minutes saying, well,
leave it at that.
The show ends. Like, we have to leave it.
You don't have to leave it at that. We're talking about the Constitution of the United
but
States.
They didn't.
And if you don't support that, what the heck are you doing in office swearing allegiance to it?
Yeah. And I will say, having seen the clip, I don't fault. I was all ready to say, Stephanopoulos, why don't you follow up? But he does a lot. So, okay. That's just plain. Joyce is just sitting there saying, I don't really care about anything. And when it comes right down to it, I'm not very moderate at all. And I'm afraid of Donald Trump. And I cannot be allowed, I will not allow myself to be filmed saying something that Donald Trump supporters could construe as being unsupportive of Donald Trump, even as he's saying terminate the Constitution. Well, he won't. That's not possible. So he can't do it. So what's the point of my saying whether I would support him or not? The point is that, if he were to win the presidency, or he once said he did win the presidency. This whole world believed that he was president of the United States. And when you swear to support and defend the Constitution of the United States, but then say, also screw the Constitution of the United States. Let's get rid of it, and you are okay with that.
Then there's a problem.
I'm sorry. What I tell you, I know there's not the votes for it, but on today they should be down on the floor saying, you either have to retract your statement or I'm going to file an expulsion resolution. It won't win, but there should be an expulsion resolution. You took the same oath. And now I'm asking you to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and you won't do it. I'll lose the vote, but only because other Republicans also won't expel you for being a traitor. So
Ron Brownstein says, look, this is a simple question for GOP leader and leader McConnell. That is to say, Kevin McCarthy, the person who wants to but doesn't have the votes to be speaker at the moment, is somebody who expresses these views, these plans fit to serve as president of the United States. Is someone who expresses these views, these plans, fit to serve as president of the United States? No. Would you support him as a 2024 GOP nominee, understanding more explicitly than ever this is something he wants to do? And that's something Stephanopoulos did with Joyce, and every reporter should do with every Republican in office. Mm-hmm. And they can't claim, I didn't hear about it. I just told you. What do you think about that? That's all you need to know.
Pretty much. They like to say that anyway, and then they walk away or run away sometimes. And
right. Well, you can't do that when you're on an interview show.
That's true. That's one of the good things. One of the few good things about one of those shows. Although I think Trump has walked out of the interviews before, too, and he makes hay out of that somehow.
Right. And by the way, for those who are unaware, the direct quote from Trump is, he called for the, quote, termination of all rules, regulations, and articles, even those found in the Constitution, end quote.
Yeah.
No problem. Yeah, that's more than a suspension.
Right. A suspension really would be enough of a problem for you. But, right. Well,
a clip instead of a magazine. Or
termination of the Constitution. Sure. We're all talking about that. And by the way,
or he called it a magazine instead of a Signy Day, so he can't talk about it because he doesn't know anything.
Yes. Well, that's also true, and we can't seem to get him to stop talking about it. But there was an awful lot wrong with the way that was answered. Joyce's answers are ridiculous. And if you really feel like unpacking them and getting down to what he's actually talking about, I mean, his excuse was, well, he won't get the nomination, which might mean because, he thinks so because he won't vote for him, but he didn't come out and say that either. But he won't get the nomination, and even if he does and he wins the presidency, you can't just terminate the Constitution. You can. I mean, you can have a revolution, certainly. But what I thought was interesting was...
thing, and I think it's, it's worth putting your markers down.
Okay.
I don't think that Trump is going to be the nominee. I think he could easily win it, that is to say the nomination, simply because the Republicans are divided, and that's how he rolls. I'll have 27%, everybody else will split the rest, and you'll have 23, and you'll have 21, and I'll win. It's possible because he has a core of fanatics who will never desert him because they're fascists, and so is he. And that's who he's playing to, and that's why he has to make sure that he nails down that base, and that's essentially, in my view, what Fuentes and Kanye West were telling him. However, I think on balance, the more public all of this is, the less likely he is actually to win the nomination. I think if you had to bet on anybody right now, it would be Ron DeSantis with Nikki Haley as his running mate. And I don't think that and I certainly don't think Trump especially, which is the more relevant part of this conversation, are likely to win the election. I think DeSantis has a better chance. But the economy is actually going fairly well, and if there are no shocks to it between now and then, which is a major assumption, nonetheless, the economy is actually being well managed. A lot of other things like the Ukraine situation and other foreign policy issues are being well managed, and so between domestic and foreign, doing your job is actually worth a lot. We talked last week about the fact that Newt Gingrich, of all people, thinks that Biden is being underestimated, or in modern political terms, misunderestimated. And, that may in fact be the case. I think Trump is being way overestimated because media needs him for clicks, and that's fine. But I think basically, his one trick pony act is getting tiresome, and I think people really are turning away from it, even those who would nominally support him. And so, I think that that's the future. How do we know this? They don't want him in Georgia right now. We got an election tomorrow. I think Warnock has an edge over Walker. I think Walker will lose. I think Warnock will win.
He is in the neighboring state.
It's close enough so that, you'd think that you'd want all the big guns there. Warnock had Obama, which is the biggest draw on the Democratic side. Biden isn't terribly popular in Georgia, so we didn't want Biden there. But Trump is the draw in the Republican Party, supposedly, and they don't want him in Georgia because they think he'll lose the election for Walker, and I think that tells you everything you need to know about Trump's chances in 2024. It's right there staring you in the face. It's like looking at the results of the special elections and the Candace referendum on abortion and saying, but I don't really know what the electorate thinks about this. Well, yes, we do.
Can we
send
him
That's
to
what happened.
Georgia? Is there any way that we could pay Trump to go? And if so, I mean, is that like intervening in the primaries
he's
again?
parachuting in anyway. And,
is he?
Having dinner with Fuentes and Kanye West is reminding everybody in Georgia what the stakes are and the fact that he hasn't gone away, and this whole thing about the Constitution, which is designed to draw attention to himself because that's what he likes to do for various and sundry reasons, including fundraising, is only making the point to Georgia voters that he's still very much around, and this still very much is an issue, and he's still very much on the ballot.
Well, okay, Georgians, you have one more day to know what to do. Yeah, all right. I will say though that the answer that this guy Joyce gave, and I guess now everybody will be asked. They should also ask the other potential candidates for president in 24 on the Republican side. Not so much do you support that, because I mean that's a pointless question since he's a political rival. They'll want to differentiate themselves, but they should say, I'd be interested to see it approached like, hey, would you be willing to go so far to save America too, to suspend the Constitution or terminate the Constitution? You're for terminating it, right? And either make them differentiate themselves on policy grounds, if necessary, or find out if they're still afraid to to criticize Trump. Like, how are you going to run for office if you can't
Right.
run?
Are you saying that you would vote for a Republican regardless because Democrats
That's
are
what
worse?
Joyce
Worse
is
at
saying.
what? What exactly do you mean? What is the problem with the Democratic Party?
And the
Tell
idea
us.
of
It's too woke. Does that mean that there's too many non-whites in it? What are you saying?
to something. I don't know. Too interested in the Constitution. But yeah, his whole thing about Trump's actual statement about terminating all the rules, all the laws, even the Constitution, in order to I guess quote unquote get things right. It was interesting just listening to Joyce's rationale. Well, I'll vote for whoever the Republican nominee is. I will point out to you that if you're
Sounds
suspending
like Glenn
all
Youngkin.
the rules, how will you know who the Republican nominee is? I mean, that it's a rules-based system. You come
Well,
up with a
it sounds
nominee.
exactly like Glenn Youngkin, and given that it does,
Yeah.
how can Youngkin possibly be a moderate?
I don't know. It's not very moderate to say I will literally support party over country. That is not a moderate thing to do.
Right.
Not
Bob
a moderate thing to
Stefanowski
say.
tried that in Connecticut. It didn't work. Leora Levy, the Republican senatorial candidate, was more like a Carrie Lake, Mark Vinsham Republican. That didn't work either. I mean, the fact of the matter is it's not working in elections, and that's how come Trump's really only won one.
Well, there's
And
one
that
too
was,
many.
interesting situation. On the one hand, people didn't want Hillary, and on the other hand, Russia really did intervene.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. Now that there'll be no rules, how will you know who wins? I don't know. Trump says he won, so that's all that Dave Joyce is interested in, I guess. Is Trump
Yeah.
says he's the nominee, then I'm supporting him.
Anyway, when it comes to Georgia, I sending you a couple of things. First thing I'm sending you is a graph from Predicted over the last 30 days. But as you know, I like to call it Reacted
Okay.
because that's basically what happens.
What are we
Their
looking
money
at
said
here?
that Herschel Walker's going to win. Herschel Walker's going to win. And then the election came and he didn't win. And all of a sudden the bottom fell out literally of the market. That's what it is. It's a market.
Yeah,
So the
okay,
touts
right.
there are trying to push you to buy futures on who will win or who will not win. And right now, it's not really worth anything to pick Walker. His value
I guess
in
not.
terms of who they think is going to win plunged, and it's been plunging every day since the election.
I see this chart. Yeah, okay.
And it looks like one of those alligator jaws of death,
Yeah.
graphs that are just the jaws are spreading further and further apart. And the day before the election, nobody on this particular site thinks that Herschel Walker is going to win. And then the next group of data comes from 538, which has been following what little polling there is on this. And again, remember, nonpartisan polling came pretty close to the election. It was the partisan polls that were wrong. So here's the polls that we have since the first round of the election.
The leaf blowers are back. Yes.
AARP, Fabrizio Lee and Associates, Impact Research had Warnock +4. Something called Frederick Polls had even. Phillips Academy, who I don't know as a pollster and whether they've actually been around very much, has Walker up by 1 on November 26, 27. CNN's pollster, SSRS, has Warnock up by 7 with registered voters and 4 with likely voters, for those of you who can't tell what a likely voter is, especially in a runoff, especially in this circumstance. Survey USA, for one of the Atlanta TV stations, has Warnock up by 3. Emerson College had Warnock up by 2. And something called Patriot Polling, which leans Republican, has Warnock up by 2 in the latest poll that's out November 30, December 2nd. So if you take the totality of the polling since the first round of the election, Warnock +4, even, Walker +1, Warnock +7, Warnock +4, Warnock +3, Warnock +2, Warnock +2. It's pretty clear that Warnock has a slight edge. So if you're talking about the reacted, predicted people, whether you're talking about the polls, whether you're talking about the amount of money available, Warnock has a bigger bankroll. How they're acting, Walker is not allowed to be in public by himself. The analysts who are looking at who voted, why they voted, it's all, pretty interesting. and generally leans Warnock. There's an article, for example, in the Washington Post today, final push for votes in Georgia runoff tests party's sway in battleground. And one of the things that's interesting about this is that they're really trying hard not to say that Warnock is leading.
Oh, well, that's why it was so valuable for you to give us the day by day and rundown of all those polls. Well, that makes it pretty obvious.
Warnock has a slight edge any way you look at it, but they don't want to say that.
Why?
So, Steve, it's a very tight race in Georgia, they'll tell you, and it is. Yeah, Steve Williams is a type of voter Republicans have been working furiously to court over the past 4 weeks in Georgia's Senate runoff race. Steve Williams, remember Steve Williams? I want to get back to say
Steve Williams.
It's interesting
that guy
because
is amazing.
If Warnock wins 51-49, nobody will be surprised.
Mm-hmm.
If he wins 52-48, they'll say, wow, that was stronger than I thought. And if it's 53-47, it's a blowout.
Well,
and those are all like a point, from each other.
Yes, that's true. But a point contains multitudes.
Yeah, I mean, it reminds me, it's starting to remind me of the Northam, He's going to lose to Gillespie until you actually see the numbers. So we'll see what happens.
Okay.
Anyway, Steve Williams is a 33-year-old, and he laments high inflation and voted for Georgia Governor Brian Kemp. During an interview in a park here in Duluth, he criticized Democrats' stance on culture war issues like gender identity.
You're kidding. All right. Is this in a diner?
But he backed Raphael Warnock for Senate in November and plans to do so again tomorrow.
Okay.
He said he wants to underscore a message he thinks many voters sent this midterm cycle. Republicans, quote, can't expect us to vote for garbage candidates, end quote. I am so behind this guy.
All right.
Georgia remains culturally red, he said, but we're not just partisan machines. Now, Democrats are hoping that many independents and Republicans will vote similarly on Tuesday, allowing the party to bolster their slim majority in the Senate. And, it's basically treat Herschel Walker like Roy Moore. And yes, it's terrible that Moore was the nominee in the first place and that anybody would vote for him, but nonetheless, treat him like he's Roy Moore and shun him.
There you go. That's an excellent approach. And
for both parties, the runoff election triggered when neither Senate candidate won a majority provides a final test. So, they're talking about the fact that they really hope their voters somehow turn out, but talking to guys like the one that I quoted, I don't know if they're really going to be able to do that.
Stuart Baskin. I don't remember what was
here's another one who's interesting for a guy who actually did vote for Walker.
Williams was, right?
Or will vote for Walker. GOP voter George Dunn said he reluctantly cast another vote for Walker in the runoff despite concerns about the candidate because he wants to curtail Democrats' power in Washington.
Wow.
And then the story goes on to point out Walker's flaws. Dunn said it helped that Kemp went out to stump for Walker and Trump kept his distance. I made the decision if Trump set foot in Georgia, I was out, he said.
Huh. All right.
But I voted for Walker because Trump didn't show up in Georgia.
How interesting.
I'm telling you, Trump is not the electoral machine he thinks he is, and the media thought he was.
Right. Well, that seems
the juice just isn't there. And this is a guy you'd think would be prime for, I just need this one thing to sway me. And Trump says, yeah, I'm in. I mean, I'm already almost in anyway, even though I'm fully aware of how bad Walker is. But, if I don't want Democrats, and if Trump says do it, no, he says the opposite. I reluctantly voted for Walker because I hate Democrats. I don't want anything to do with Democrats. But if Trump sets foot anywhere near me, I'm out of here.
Maybe. We'll see. I mean, he could be lying. There is that. But I like the quote, and we'll take it and run with it. He did say it, and,
Now, this is getting play still in Georgia. On Saturday, the former president suggested terminating the Constitution if necessary to throw out his 2020 loss to Biden.
Yeah, right. Let's just do that.
Gabe Sterling, a vocal critic of Trump's unsuccessful efforts and happens to be the election official in charge of what's going on here.
Right.
He's deputy to Brad Raffensperger, but is the public face of here are the numbers out of Georgia. It's ridiculous, Gabriel Sterling said. It's insane to suspend the Constitution. Come on, man. Seriously?
Terminate. Yes. It's impeachable. It's expellable.
But for the purposes of this discussion, it's also getting play in Georgia. And no, it's not helping Herschel Walker's chances of pulling it out at the end.
I guess not. And I imagine they won't catch him on record asking, what do you think about terminating the Constitution? Because he won't answer any questions.
Right.
But you should just shout it and see if he does it, if he's out in public anywhere. I would hold a gun to the Constitution.
Tim Scott is down helping Herschel Walker. Scott faulted Warnock and John Ossoff for helping pass trillions in stimulus during the coronavirus pandemic.
Yeah.
Dear Lord, save us from
guys.
the high IQ stupid people. Said, who is this? This is probably that sure Kennedy guy from Louisiana.
Okay.
They may be smart, but they don't have any sense. Pollsters and strategists said the GOP's struggles in the Senate race echoed nationwide problems. Candidate quality really did seem to matter, said Brian Bennett, a lead pollster for Democratic-aligned Navigator Research. In a recent Navigator focus group of split-ticket voters across the states, which the Washington Post observed, one man from the Atlanta area said he backed Kemp and Warnock in part because of Democrats' legislation to cap prescription drug prices.
What? Wait a minute.
Well, both parties.
Oh, he supported
Kemp
who
and
for
Warnock.
that? Okay.
He supported Warnock because he's into the capping drug prices,
and then
he's
Kemp
a Republican, so he supported Kemp. Now, Democrats say they're confident that they have Republicans outmatched on the ground. So if we're talking ground game in a close race, it only matters if the race is close. But if you're ahead and you have a better ground game, that's yet another thing on the Warnock as a slight edge column
ground
to talk about here.
Everyone loves ground.
No. So what they're hopeful of, that GOP-dominated areas had good, strong showing. But again, we talked about the fact that if your campaign manager think it's a great thing that more of our votes are left.
Oh, right.
After the early vote.
Yeah, I remember that.
That's a way of saying, well, you mean your voters didn't turn out.
Yeah, or they're
How do you know they will? So that's all set up for tomorrow. So those are the big stories I think we covered today.
Okay. Well,
we didn't get to the North Carolina terrorist attack on the electrical grid because I don't really know enough about it.
Well, I guess there's now leaf blower terrorists outside my house. All right, we'll catch up on Wednesday when we know more. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. The leaf blower in the morning show. These leaf blowers are still here. It is unbelievable. I mean, I was joking with Greg during the break that there must be a leaf left on the tree, and they're just standing under the tree waiting for that last leaf to fall, I guess. I don't know what's going on, but it's quite annoying, and I'm sure it's a real relief to be off the air and not listening to this anymore. So sorry, everybody. But, yeah, I mean, it's unfair to the workers who were doing this stuff, but I was like, during the break, I wanted to like throw eggs at these guys from my back door or something. Just like, listen, get out of here. Forget the leaves. Get lost already. It's just, you can't do it. What if people have babies sleeping in there? What if people are doing podcasts? Like, I can't really... I feel bad about that, yelling at them and throwing things and saying, there's a podcast going on in here. What's the matter with you? Just earning your pay with physical labor and loud things that are going to damage your hearing for low pay. Anyway, you get the idea. I feel rather bad about it. So, okay, we had to leave aside for the time being, but now the time is over, to leave aside the story of the North Carolina power grid attack. And Greg's right, we don't really know enough about it. It's very weird and murky because there are a lot of, well, one, there's some bad things have happened, but not terrible, and no one's been killed, thankfully. But it's not entirely clear that you can follow the narrative that's been suggested, which is that the power grid attack was aimed at knocking out electrical power in order to prevent a scheduled drag show performance from going on for a number of reasons. One, it's a little bit of a fly and sledgehammer problem. Are you really going to attack two power substations and take out power to something like 40,000 local residents for the purposes of preventing a drag show from going on? Although they are crazy and they are very intent on making a big splash in protesting the ongoing problem, as they see it, of of drag shows, which is a whole other subject that they could get so wound up in all of this. And I did see over the weekend a very interesting clip of believe it or not, an interesting in the bad sense of a clip of Tucker Carlson with Chris Rufo on the show, kind of setting up this whole campaign against drag shows in general. And the whole thing is premised on Chris Rufo getting out there and saying, just flatly asserting that drag performers are targeting children, which is just not true. But Chris Rufo has made all of his fame and fortune on pretending that he's uncovering vast plots against America's children, whether it's from teachers or drag performers. That's his bread and butter. And Tucker Carlson just takes it and runs with it, but ends up finishing the part of the clip that I saw by saying, yeah, people should arm themselves and get out there and resist the, allowance of drag performances. And it was a very neat and choreographed handoff of that rhetoric. Chris Rufo was saying you should arm yourself with information about how bad and dangerous drag performances are. And Tucker Carlson says, yes, I absolutely agree. People should arm themselves. Get it? See? Anyway, the reason for the reluctance to dive into the story is because it's entirely possible that this was done for very different reasons. But opportunist lunatics have jumped in to say, yeah, we were going to try and prevent this drag show from going on. And the other reason it would be a terrible claim for them to do is that the drag show did not get knocked out. It wasn't interrupted. Apparently they went ahead and had the performance anyway by flashlight, essentially. And so, not a very good plan just in terms of actually being effective against drag shows. But anyway, the issue is, we now have to look into this because apparently some lunatic down there in North Carolina, I don't know what you have to do to claim credit for for terrorist attacks these days. Maybe you can do it on Mastodon. I don't know. But that's what happened, and people told somebody, I don't know whether they went to police or whether they just used social media to announce that, well, this was all about stopping this drag show, which is difficult to believe, frankly. The CNN reporting on the story is FBI joins investigation into North Carolina's power outage caused by intentional attacks on substations. And they're having a great deal of difficulty working out what to call the thing, just like with the termination/suspension issues about the Constitution. Here, this is some folks insisting that this is vandalism. Others insisting, no, it's a targeted attack designed to, prevent this show from going on, possibly, I guess, which is a social grievance of theirs, and so therefore terrorism. So it's difficult to know, but at the same time, I could see it falling into the vandalism category if it's. I mean, there are places in the Carolinas and elsewhere in this country where gun culture prevails, where things get shot up as a matter of drunken recreation. 2 power stations, would you say? Would ordinarily not, but if you're driving down the road that sometimes parallels these power transformer substations, you'll pass a second one, and they present large targets, and you'll fire your gun into it for fun, and when the lights go out, if you're drunk enough, that's a yeehaw moment. So who knows? All right, so here's the way CNN is treating it at the moment. No suspects or motive announced, so I guess that they are pretending that the person who said that, oh, I was behind it, or I know why the power was knocked out and it's because of the drag show, is just talking out of their ass. And it might be that ends up being the case. With no suspects or motive announced, the FBI is joining the investigation into power outages in North Carolina county, believed to have been caused by, quote, intentional and, quote, targeted attacks on substations that left around 40,000 customers in the dark Saturday night, prompting a curfew and emergency declarations. By the way, I think they'll probably get around to it in this article, but one of the other things I saw mentioned over the weekend was apparently when the lights went out, people immediately went to the gun stores to like loot the gun stores. I'm going to rob a gun store. I'm going to steal a bunch of guns because of all the, responsible gun owners out there, et cetera, et cetera. But the police apparently had to be scrambled, as they put it, so that they could have cops have a presence at the gun stores. I don't know if any of the cops stole guns, but whatever. This was in Moore County, North Carolina. The mass outage in Moore County turned into a criminal investigation when responding utility crews found signs of potential vandalism of equipment at various sites, including 2 substations that had been damaged by gunfire, according to the Moore County Sheriff's Office. But again, that would not be unusual, I think, probably in Moore County to find, roadside gunfire damage anywhere. Quite honestly, the person or persons who did this knew exactly what they were doing, Moore County Sheriff Ronnie Fields said during a Sunday news conference. We don't have a clue why Moore County. I don't know that they knew what they were doing, but the cops seemed to think so. So, all right. Well, then that gets you closer to the terrorism explanation, I think. Fields said multiple rounds were fired at the 2 substations. It was targeted. It wasn't random. The sheriff would not say whether the criminal activity was domestic terrorism, but noted no group has stepped up to acknowledge or accept that they're the ones who did it, except for the one that said we did it. Because drag show, which I guess means they may have done that and the police are saying, yeah, we just don't believe that that's a real thing, so we're not giving it any air. Authorities announced a mandatory curfew from 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. starting Sunday night, with Fields saying the decision was made to protect residents and businesses. In addition to the FBI, the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation has joined the investigation. It's a good thing for the Bureau of Investigation to join, I think, if you ask me. More than 33,000 customers were still in the dark across the county Sunday evening. The Duke Energy outage map showed. We don't like Duke Energy, right? For some, the outage may stretch into Thursday, officials said, upending life for tens of thousands. So thanks again, yeehaw guys who did this, or whether you're terrorists or just lunatics in general. All schools in the county will be closed Monday, and authorities have opened a shelter running on a generator. And by the way, you will recall, of course, in these reddish areas of states like North Carolina, nothing perturbs the local populace more than forced shutdowns of schools. Listen to the parents. This is CRT or something like that. And masks and I don't know what. Remember, shutting down the schools is horrible and worthy of storming the state capitol with weapons and taking over. Unless schools are closed because some idiot with weapons shot up the... Well, maybe you only have yourselves to blame. Traffic lights are also out, and while a few stores with generators were able to open their doors, several businesses and churches in Moore County were closed on Sunday. CNN affiliate WRAL reported, we're just getting over COVID, and now this, the sheriff said. I thought they were saying COVID has been over for like a year, but okay. It's going to hurt all of our restaurants and businesses. Inside people's homes, it's become difficult to keep the cold out. We have a 6-month-old baby in the house. We're out of heat, and we're trying to get heat for her, Carthage resident Chris Thompson told WRAL. Well, they should come here and get heat off of these leaf blowers. We got it to spare here. Chilly temperatures with lows in the 30s were expected in the area overnight Sunday with highs in the 50s and a chance of rain expected on Monday. Yeah, I'm actually doing the weather report for Carthage, North Carolina. It's happening. Moore County is in central North Carolina, about 50 miles northwest of Fayetteville, if that helps anybody. What about the damage? Well, there were, it says here, millions of dollars worth of damage. The estimated cost of the substation damage is in the millions. The damage has been significant, and rerouting power isn't an option. Oh, no. Well, I guess if it was, they would have done it. Equipment will have to be replaced. Brooks said, we're pursuing multiple paths of restoration so that we can restore as many customers as quickly as possible, recognizing that we are looking at pretty sophisticated repair with some fairly large equipment. In addition to the gunfire damage at the substations, a gate at one of the locations appears to have been taken off its hinges. Assistant Chief Mike Cameron of the Southern Pines Fire and Rescue Department told CNN. While it's unclear what motivated the alleged vandalism, the sheriff on Sunday addressed rumors circulating on social media that the attack was an attempt to thwart a local drag show. Fields said investigators, quote, have not been able to tie anything back to the drag show, which was scheduled in the town of Southern Pines at 7 p.m. Saturday, around the time the power went out. So it's just kind of hanging out there as a, well, maybe, or maybe just someone talking out of their ass. The county declared a state of emergency to protect residents and property and maintain public services, authorities said. The county-wide curfew is expected to stay in effect nightly while the emergency declaration is in effect. It's going to be very, very dark, and it's going to be very chilly tonight, and we don't need to have anyone out on the streets, and that is the reason for our curfew. It's actually, I think, probably the large numbers of stores that can be robbed when the power is out. But they didn't want to say so. Please stay home tonight. The roads are dangerous. That's true where there are traffic lights that are out, I guess. The emergency order also encourages residents to conserve fuel. With streets in the dark, the area has been seen increased emergency calls, and vehicle accidents are being reported because traffic lights are out. People who rely on oxygen, which is to say all of us, but I think they mean here, bottled oxygen, have also placed emergency calls. The shelter was opened at the Moore County Sports Complex, and trailers with bathrooms and shower facilities are being brought in to replace all the electric showers that are out. But, pumps, I guess, could be electric in some places. Anyway, wells, etc. As for schools, it's unclear how long campuses will stay closed. Moore County Superintendent Tim Locklear said decisions regarding school openings for the remainder of the week will be made on a day-by-day basis. And this is a great opportunity to close in and brick in some of the doors on schools there, because everyone knows doors are an invitation to gun violence. So anyway, that's what's the latest on this. They don't know what the hell exactly motivated this thing, and it could be just a bunch of idiots doing nothing. And so it could have nothing to do with the drag show, could have everything to do with it. Seems like I said, some bit of a sledgehammer for a fly problem, but or solution to the problem. But there it is. All right, let's see. So, other things going on. I mentioned that there was some Supreme Court cases coming up, and this week I think is arguments in the, is it Moore versus, is it Harper? I can't even remember the name of the case coming up, but this is the independent state legislature case that's coming up. Yeah, Moore versus Harper. And Adam Serwer has a bit to say about it in The Atlantic, and we have a read or two left coming to us this month in The Atlantic, so perhaps we would use this up. Here's a provocative title for his piece: Is Democracy Constitutional? And that's essentially where we are with this stupid case. I think Adam's piece, and I'm pretty sure I have another thing sitting in here somewhere that has something to do with the cases and how much relies, or how much is in the balance here with these cases, just how dumb the claims that they're making are. But I think Adam, as usual, does a pretty good job explaining exactly what's how consequential this is. So, is democracy constitutional? In Moore versus Harper, the Supreme Court will decide if anyone besides itself should be able to adjudicate American election law. That's basically what it comes down to. I think he's got it right here. And it's not a new piece either. It's from July of this year, but I guess being recirculated because the arguments are upcoming. And I guess also I want to reread this in light of Trump's comments, which, granted they might not mean anything. He may never win the nomination, and even if he wins the nomination, he may never win the presidency again. And even if he wins the presidency again, as Dave Joyce is saying, well, he's not going to, or he can't just terminate the Constitution. But you never know what's possible when you have the Supreme Court behind you. And given that the Supreme Court appears to be at least, there's more than one actual vote on the court in favor, it seems, of this independent state legislature theory. And it's quite dangerous because a lot of the members of the Supreme Court might, in fact, be invested in advancing this stupid theory. not necessarily on behalf of Donald Trump. So even eliminating Donald Trump from the picture doesn't necessarily get rid of this thing. I guess I better get reading so that you know what's going on here. Every American child in public school learns that the U.S. political system is one of checks and balances in which the judicial, executive, and legislative branches constrain one another to ensure that no one branch of government exercises too much power. One pending case before the Supreme Court asks, what if they didn't? And that's a great way of starting it, because that's always the premise I start with almost every Republican case these days, or the Republican position on these cases, or creating these controversies and creating these cases, is mostly Republicans saying, well, what if we didn't? The law says we are supposed to canvass the vote in this county and approve it and pass it on to the state Secretary of State by this date. Well, what if we didn't? The law says you are supposed to comply with this subpoena. Well, what if we didn't? The law says you are not supposed to steal classified information from the White House. You're supposed to give it back when you vacate the premises. Well, what if we didn't? It's always, what if we didn't? Well, in Moore versus Harper, North Carolina, there's the segue, North Carolina Republicans are arguing that no other state body, including the state Supreme Court, has the power to restrict the legislature's ability to set voting rules, specifically ones allowing legislators to gerrymander the state in defiance of a ruling by the state Supreme Court finding that their plan violated the state constitutional amendment guaranteeing the right to vote. This belief is based on a crank legal premise called the independent state legislature theory. It's already getting too complicated, but by the way, this all, in case you were wondering why my obsession with this, besides the fact that everybody else is also obsessed with it and I read their articles, this goes way, we've been talking about this for a very long time. Before, I think they were really frequently articulating the theory and giving it the name of the independent state legislature theory. When we were watching some of the Kraken-style lawsuits post-election 2020, particularly in Wisconsin, where they were suing to insist that clause of the Constitution that gives state legislatures the prerogative to select, essentially what we always have believed for 250 years or whatever, to select the method by which a state's electoral college votes will be determined. That is, who will be the members of the electoral college casting those votes. And the choice is, it's up to the legislature to either adopt a general election and actually have people vote and then count up the votes, and whoever wins, the most number of votes in the state wins those seats in the electoral college, or to appoint them or have any other method of selecting them, whether it's drawing straws or coin tossing. We've been over this ground, right? That's what it means when it says that the state legislatures will have the right to determine how those decisions are made, the methods by which the selection will be made. And Republicans, post-election, having lost the 2020 election, were now claiming, no, what that means is that a state legislature, and only the state legislature, can make decisions about how late polls stay open, or what time they open in the morning, or whether or not a drop box is usable, or whether or not you should allow ballots that don't have a date written on the envelope to be counted, etc. And that's never been the interpretation of this portion of the Constitution. It's always been that the state legislature makes the determination to have an election or not in order to select its members of the electoral college. And then the Board of Elections or the Secretary of State or some other state functionary is delegated the responsibility of running the elections and actually setting the rules for how they'll be handled on the grounds, the nuts and bolts, what time the polls open, what time the polls close, what the ballot's going to look like, what machines are going to be used to count the ballots, whether or not you can put them in boxes before you count them, et cetera, et cetera. Otherwise, state legislatures would have no time for anything else. They would be convening and have no time for legislating for the rest of the state. They'd be instead dealing with the minutia of election law. So they offload that onto professionals, often nonpartisan professionals. And it's worked just fine for 200 and plus years, but now they think, no, we've been doing it wrong the whole time. Everyone is pre-wrong, right? As Adam starts out, every American child learns XYZ in grade school and, I guess later on in middle school and high school as well. And these are the basic facts of our civic society. But you're all pre-wrong about that. It actually turns out that something completely different was what the founders had in mind. And as it turns out, it's that the state legislatures can simply declare anything to be true with respect to elections, not just state elections, but federal elections, which is a really weird thing to believe if you're a federalist or originalist or whatever kind of ist you might want to throw in there. It's an odd thing to believe that the state legislature can say, these are who the electors are, and this is the outcome of this election, and you're not allowed to do that, and so the outcome of that election is overturned, and no one can second guess us. So where were we? In Moore versus Harper, right? North Carolina Republicans are arguing that no other state body, including the Supreme Court, has anything to say about this stuff. So when the Supreme Court says these districts that you have drawn for yourselves and for the federal elections are unconstitutionally, facially violative of the civil rights of an enormous number of North Carolinian citizens. There is a state constitutional provision that says that the right to vote, shall be interpreted this way and shall not be, let's say infringed in any way. Your political gerrymanders diminish and dilute the votes of, targeted individuals and communities. And in this case, what Rick Santorum calls, when he catches himself in time, blah people, right? So if the state Supreme Court says that, that's a big deal, right? Well, it isn't, according to independent state legislature theory, which says that the state legislatures can say, it's weird that we have these other branches in this state, but we don't really need them. We get the last say-so on everything. So, leading up to the break, we'll read another paragraph or two and set the table for finishing on the other side. The justification for this theory is that the U.S. Constitution's text about state legislatures setting election rules refers not simply to passing laws or adopting state constitutional provisions regarding voting, but to an authority to decide such matters unilaterally. State legislatures themselves pass laws and participate in the process of adopting constitutional amendments. So it makes no sense to argue, as the independent state legislature theory does, that such bodies are not bound by rules they themselves have set themselves. Nevertheless, this idea is the kind of obtuse, context-free pedantry, is that how you would say it, pedantry, that malicious lawyers adore. The election law expert Rick Hasen writes, in its most extreme interpretation, this theory would mean that a state legislature could simply overturn federal election results that it didn't like, based on its perception, no matter how unfounded, that the rules were violated. Hypothetically, the Supreme Court could check such abuse of power, but its capture by the Republican Party means that in practice, it might not. We have run elections the same way for 230 years. Thank you for giving us the number. 230 years in this country. And under that 230-year history, the independent state legislature hearing has not been the law. This whole theory, it says hearing, but I think they mean theory, has not been the law. It isn't. That, according to Thomas Wolfe, an election law expert with the Brennan Center. It's mainly been moving forward under gas that's been provided almost entirely by just a few conservative justices on the Supreme Court, effectively citing themselves for the proposition. And we'll talk about, just how dangerous that is and what they're doing here, inciting themselves for the underlying authority after this break. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. All right, welcome back to the Leaf Blower in the Morning Show here on Leaf Blower Radio. Holy cow. Still out there, by the way. And let's see. Oh, it turns out that did we drop our signal at some point? I know where I got this. It says back up. Oh, here we go. Scott's texts, almost one on top of the other. Netroots might be down and back up. We might have just had a hiccup there. Someone may have shot a power station. No one really knows exactly what happened there, but I guess we're back. Okay. That's good. Just in time for you to hear the now significantly quieter whine of the gas-powered leaf blowers in the background. Woe betide any leaf that thinks it's going to be unblown, I guess. I don't really know exactly what to go with that. But anyway, back to the Atlantic and Adam Serwer's now several months old look at the independent state legislature theory. Once again, everything old, new again, because they're taking this case up at long last, I guess, unfortunately, this week. So where did we leave off? Ah, yes, right. It was Thomas Wolfe saying, look, we've run election laws the same way for 230 years in this country. And under that 230-year history, the independent state legislature theory has not been the law. But it's mainly been moving forward under gas that's been provided almost entirely by just a few Supreme Court justices, effectively citing themselves for the proposition. You'd think that the theory's recent vintage would make it anathema to self-identified originalists. Remember that, for instance, Alito saying with respect to abortion law, well, there's no, deeply rooted, ancient, textual justification for abortion rights in this country. It's not something that the founders even knew about, which actually was untrue, but they certainly didn't discuss it, which, may or may not actually also be true. But anyway, the point is it's new, and so therefore, right? And this precedent is under 50 years old, and so therefore, yada, yada. Whether it was abortion rights or actually might not have been about something else, now that I think about it. But at any rate, it was an absurd proposition when it was made, no matter what the subject was. But as it turns out, just highlighting the hypocrisy here for just a moment, no, they don't actually care about that. They think that the theory's recent vintage would make it anathema? No. But among most of the justices, this philosophy is implemented with scarcely more rigor than one might put into scanning Wikipedia to win an argument with a stranger online. I don't know what he's linking to something about this. We'll have to see what that one is. Oh, Roe overturned. Okay, but the Alito opinion apparently had some reference there. Anyway, more disturbing, the popularity of the theory among conservative legal elites is further indication of their commitment to an idea of democracy, in quotes, in which the Republican Party is simply not allowed to lose, and of their desire to alter the system to ensure that it cannot, or if you need be, terminate the Constitution for instance. The independent state legislature theory has drawn a great deal of attention for its most radical potential application, the possibility of a legislature voting to throw out its state's presidential election results and appointing electors to favor the candidate of its choice. This is what Donald Trump tried to get Republican-controlled states to do after he lost in 2020. But even in the narrower example before the Supreme Court, the adoption of this argument would allow state legislatures a dangerous level of influence over who wins federal office. This is such a mockery of the very idea of representative democracy that you would think it would be dismissed out of hand. If you don't like how things are, vote. But also, the people in power get to decide whether your vote counts, and virtually no one can check them. That's not really going to go over very well. The beginnings of this idea came from a concurrence in Bush v. Gore, the case that threw the 2000 election to George W. Bush, written by the segregationist and then Chief Justice William Rehnquist, joined by Clarence Thomas and the late Antonin Scalia. The opinion in that case infamously declared itself non-precedential, but the theory has gained popularity in recent years anyway because of its usefulness to Republicans trying to change 2020 state election rules to favor then-President Donald Trump. Just, again, to pause and reiterate here, remember that the case, the Bush v. Gore, infamously did, in fact, declare itself non-precedential. This case can't be cited as precedent for reasons. And now, of course, it's being cited as precedent for the independent state legislature theory. How surprising and weird. And I'm sure we'll come back to another angle on that later on in the article. It is perhaps not, here it is. It is perhaps not a coincidence that there are as many justices on the Supreme Court who worked as lawyers for Bush in that case as there are Democratic appointees. So, how do you like that? It's not precedent, said Rehnquist, who's dead, Clarence Thomas, who's brain dead, and Antonin Scalia, who's dead. Now, they've been replaced, and they've been replaced by lawyers who worked on that case, who aren't necessarily in agreement that it ought not to be used as precedent, and in fact, have a very specific use for it in mind, which is that they should be allowed to use it to change the state election rules to favor, if not Donald Trump in 2020, then certainly any Republican running for office in the future. Indeed, as Helen White of Protect Democracy writes, in election cases in 2020, Justices Neil Gorsuch, Samuel Alito, Clarence Thomas, and Brett Kavanaugh all indicated that they would have adopted the theory, independent state legislature, and its vast consequences. That theory, she notes, is, quote, at odds with more than 100 years of Supreme Court precedent and would disrupt whole bodies of law written by state legislatures and reviewed by state courts relying on that precedent. That might be true, but it is not at odds with the partisan interests of the right-wing justices, a far more important factor in Supreme Court decisions. The outcome in Moore versus Harper would not affect state and local contests, but in large part Republicans have already succeeded in election-proofing legislatures in states that they control by drawing district lines to favor Republican-leaning constituencies. In closely divided states such as Wisconsin, gerrymandering and geographic polarization mean that the GOP can win some 2/3 of state legislative seats with less than half of the statewide vote. Other states have made progress in trying to end partisan gerrymandering through constitutional amendments or state redistricting commissions. But if the Supreme Court accepts the independent state legislature theory, that progress would be entirely wiped out. In the 2019 case Rucho versus Common Cause, the Supreme Court said that federal courts couldn't review partisan gerrymandering, but that was fine because state courts could, based on provisions in state constitutions. Many states have constitutional amendments protecting the right to vote, but those would be irrelevant if state courts had no power to review a legislature that violated that right, right? And so for Republicans, that actually sounds like a good idea. What if there are protections in the state law and in the state constitution against gerrymandering, but we want to gerrymander? Well, the independent state legislature theory says state courts can't stop you from gerrymandering because it's not up to them. State legislatures make the rules for elections. Don't you see? There is no such thing as judicial review. And it's funny, they do get to a sort of I guess there's a possible originalist argument in there, but I mean, wow, it's really splitting hairs of originalism to say, well, there's nothing in the Constitution about judicial review. That was, in fact, technically an invention of John Marshall in Marbury versus Madison. And although I guess we accept that as originalism because it's founding era, and they were politicians alongside who worked alongside and in many cases participated in the founding of the Constitution. Their interpretation of it is just sort of taking it, well, that's very old and they were around and so therefore it's originalism. But it's not in the text. There is that, if you're a textualist. Anyway, the court said, though, back in Rucho versus Common Cause, never fear. If you want to address partisan gerrymandering, go to state courts because state constitutions provide people with an avenue forward. Wolf said, if the court turns around 3 or 4 years later and says, actually, state constitutions don't constrain legislatures and their federal election lawmaking, then the promise of Rucho was a false promise. The sheer number of catch-22s involved here can be confusing. Federal courts cannot review partisan gerrymandering, so the people should turn to state courts, which also can't review it. If you want to protect voting rights, you must do it by federal legislation, except the Supreme Court will decide that that legislation is unconstitutional because it violates imaginary principles unmentioned in the Constitution. Just as, if you're going to stand there and say, well, ultimately judicial review isn't in the Constitution either, so therefore there is no such thing. And then say, but I also want you to follow this precedent, which we're inventing here on the court as well. Even though I just told you don't have to listen to us at all, this time you should when it comes to gerrymandering, for instance. Okay, that doesn't make any sense, but all right. Political questions must be decided by the people, except if those in power conclude that they don't like how the people might decide them. I wonder what he's linking to here. This, too, is linked. And it's back to one of the Roe issue articles, I guess something that Adam had written about the issue earlier. But whenever you say stuff like that, what comes to mind for me is the state referenda where state legislatures have disliked the outcome and just thrown them out. Thinking Missouri and Medicaid expansion, if I have all my facts on that one right. But we've seen it in a number of instances where people vote for a pretty clear position in a state referendum, and the state legislature just says either screw it or we'll change it in some way. Anyway, this can all be reconciled somehow, given the Republican Party's de facto position that elections are by definition illegitimate if the GOP does not win them, and that the Democratic Party's constituencies are less American and therefore their votes should count for less. Counter-majoritarian mechanisms such as the Senate and the Electoral College have already allowed the GOP to win presidential elections and gain control of the Supreme Court without a majority of voters. The adoption of the independent state legislature theory would strengthen the party's ambition to lock itself in power indefinitely, regardless of how the electorate votes. So then why not do it, right? With the election lies he used to justify an attempt to overthrow the government, Trump gave voice to the idea that Democratic voters are inherently illegitimate. But Republican elites have been scheming for years to implement voting restrictions that would give conservative constituencies more power, and no institution has been a greater ally to states looking to disenfranchise their constituents than the Roberts Court. The Supreme Court's right-wing majority has repeatedly twisted its own arguments and the text of the Constitution into knots in order to approve of Republican voting restrictions while striking down any liberal efforts to defend the right to vote that it disapproves of. Democratic backsliding in the U.S. has followed a pretty clear historical pattern. The Supreme Court directly or indirectly enables state legislatures to restrict civil and political rights, and Congress decides whether to get its act together to stop them, and it often doesn't. Jake Grumbach, the author of Laboratories Against Democracy, told me. The filibuster, oh my. The filibuster makes this pattern even more stark, since state legislatures don't tend to have supermajority requirements to weaken democracy, but Congress, the only institution to stop state legislatures from backsliding, now requires supermajorities to pass policy to protect democracy. And of course, if by some miracle Congress acts, the Robert courts can simply invalidate that legislation, based on whatever esoteric right-wing scheme happens to be in fashion among conservative lawyers. There is an underlying perception of partisan interest driving GOP hostility to voting rights that is incorrect but nevertheless important to understand. Many Republicans are under the misimpression that, quote, demographic change favors Democrats, while many Democrats believe that Republican racism will prevent their opponents from appealing to minority constituencies. Conversely, the ideological, religious, and ethnic diversity of the Democratic coalition means the party cannot target and disempower the rival party's voters the way the GOP can. The 2020 elections suggest, however, that assumptions about the political effects of a diversifying United States are incorrect. Greater turnout does not advantage Democrats, and non-white voters are not immune to Republican appeals. Growing support for the GOP among Latinos suggests that they are following the same path of assimilation as prior immigrant groups, just as immigration advocates said they would, and as immigration restrictionists loudly insisted they would not, often in racist and demeaning terms. Still, there is no moral equivalence between defending Americans' fundamental rights out of partisan interest and effacing them out of partisan interest. Reconstruction-era Republicans' defenses of black rights are not less admirable because the party would not have been viable in the post-Civil War South without them, just as the Democrats' disenfranchisement of black men in the same era is no less racist or abhorrent because it was in pursuit of one-party rule. Democracy relies on the self-interest of politicians to protect the rights of their constituents, not on the virtue and charity of heroic lawmakers. There is, nevertheless, something to learn from the conflicts over suffrage in that era, as Frederick Douglass wrote in this magazine, The Atlantic, in 1866, "The true way and the easiest way is to make our government entirely consistent with itself and give to every loyal citizen the elective franchise, a right and power which will be ever present and will form a wall of fire for his protection. The right to vote and the ability of voters to register popular dissent at the ballot box is what separates democratic systems from authoritarian ones. The ballot is a right, but it is also a means of self-defense. Politicians need not fear or respond to an electorate that lacks the ability to deprive them of office. If the Supreme Court upholds the independent state legislature theory, it will deprive the public of yet another means of defending itself. For the party that appointed the majority of the justices, that would be ideal." Well, very flowery language, but I think hitting all the correct notes about the danger of the case and, essentially the lunacy of it all, but also making the excellent point that the real problem is that a significant portion of the Supreme Court justices all developed this theory in service of the Bush v. Gore case and are anxious to see it validated, to show everybody that they were all wrong about their understanding of Bush v. Gore and election law in 2000, not to mention their understanding of election law in 2020. Okay, let's see. Other things to share with you. There are many. Let's see. In other TFG news, I suppose, I thought I might throw this out there, and we'll save some of the other subjects for tomorrow when we hear from Joan. Here's a piece that I thought was of some interest, like one of the other cases that's going on, the New York tax case, written up in Rolling Stone and a couple other publications covering this one, but I'm going to take a look at their version of it just to broaden things a little bit and diversify our source material. Victoria Bekiempis, I'm guessing is the pronunciation of this last name, Bekiempis. Trump was, quote, explicitly sanctioning tax fraud, prosecutor says, as prosecutors are sometimes wont to do. The former president is responsible for financial crime within his organization, a Manhattan prosecutor told jurors Friday. That's what prosecutors do. They tell jurors things like that, and we'll listen as well. Donald Trump was, quote, explicitly sanctioning tax fraud, unquote, when he greenlighted a salary reduction for an executive who would make up for this cut by pocketing plum untaxed benefits, Manhattan prosecutors claimed on Friday. Joshua Steinglass made the accusation during the second day of his closing argument in the criminal tax fraud trial against several of Trump's companies. Steinglass referred jurors to a 2012 document autographed by the former president himself, where he approved a $72,000 salary reduction for Trump Organization Chief Operating Officer Matthew Calamari. The prosecution has contended that Trump and his companies were well aware that Calamari, former Chief Financial Officer Alan Weisselberg, and Chief Financial Officer Jeffrey McConney were engaging in practices to secure untaxed income for executives vis-a-vis benefits such as gratis pads, that is to say, condos and apartments, right? Steinglass's comments prompted the Trump company's defense team to object, one of the many times they opposed points during his closing, and Judge Juan Merchan called them to the bench. When the contentious confab came to an end, Steinglass continued in this vein. In other words, Trump's lawyers must have lost in that objection. Steinglass pushed back against what he described as the defense's narrative that Mr. Trump was blissfully ignorant of his executive's wrongdoing and that the controversial mogul was a victim of Weisselberg and Calamari's deception. He is not on trial, Steinglass said of Trump, but that does not mean that you should believe the defense's narrative that Alan Weisselberg and Matt Calamari went rogue. There's been a lot of back and forth in this trial about the involvement of Donald Trump and other Trump family members, Steinglass said at one point, contending that corporations would be legally liable whether any company owners knew or not. Really, we don't have to prove a thing about what he knew or didn't know. Ultimately, it doesn't matter. So that's good news. Keep that in mind, jurors. Steinglass's first day of closings went into similar territory, with him telling jurors Thursday the Trump Organization cultivated a culture of fraud and deception. It's not that the folks at the Trump Organization didn't know what they were doing was illegal. It's just that they didn't care, Steinglass also said. This line of argument hearkened to prosecutor Susan Hoffinger's opening, which closely linked Trump to an alleged illegal compensation scheme that purportedly lined the pockets of Weisselberg, his longtime money man, and other company honchos. During defense closings on Thursday, two Trump company lawyers squarely placed the blame on Weisselberg, while also casting him as some sort of tragic figure, a man whose admirable loyalty was no match for subsuming avarice. Mr. Weisselberg dedicated his life to the Trump family, to Fred, to Don Jr. He helped grow the Trump Organization into the company it is today, said defense attorney Susan Nechelis. But along the way, he messed up. He got greedy. And once he started, it was difficult for him to stop. Mr. Weisselberg admitted that during this long scheme, no member of the Trump family knew about his ongoing efforts to evade taxes. He was ashamed of what he was doing. You saw him on the witness stand almost crying, Nechelis told jurors. He knew he was doing something wrong, and he was ashamed of it, and he kept it secret. When his wrongdoing came to light, the Trump family did not fire him. They did not kick him to the curb after nearly 40 years. How do you fire a member of your own family? Nichelis asked. But Mr. Weisselberg broke the law. Mr. Weisselberg is paying for his own wrongdoing. And while Weisselberg's turned state's evidence to save himself from a lengthy prison sentence, agreeing to testify in exchange for a shorter jail term, he didn't say anything that implicated Trump's companies in wrongdoing, Nichelis argued. He's atoning for his sins, but as part of the plea deal, the prosecution forced him to testify against the company he helped build. Now the prosecution's case rests on one thing, trying to convince you, the jurors, that Mr. Weisselberg's actions were done on behalf of the company. Weisselberg, Nichelis said they were done solely to benefit himself, and that is the critical issue in this case. Nichelis stressed that the key point hinges on who Weisselberg wanted to benefit. He wasn't trying to help his employer, meaning that the Trump organization wasn't on the hook for criminal liability, Nichelis contended. Over and over again, Alan Weisselberg and Comptroller Jeffrey McConney testified that Alan Weisselberg committed those crimes solely to benefit himself. In other words, no intent to benefit the corporation, Nichelis claimed. That is the critical issue in this case, which, remember, just to go back to what was being talked about, at least in Calamari's case, the idea that the company was going to save $72,000 in cash that they weren't going to have to pay to Calamari is of no benefit whatsoever to the company. They could care less about not spending $72,000, right? Sure, of course. What a great defense. The Manhattan District Attorney's Office, and in its 2021 indictment of several Trump companies, including his eponymous Trump Organization, alleged a 15-year-long tax fraud scheme. The purported financial misconduct stemmed from alleged untaxed benefits to Weisselberg in a sweeping and audacious illegal payments scheme. Prosecutors said that Weisselberg, who for decades was Trump's top money man, benefited greatly for his nearly 5 decades of fealty to the family. Beginning in 2005, Weisselberg lived in a free apartment on Manhattan's West Side. The Trump Corporation, which had the lease on his pad, paid Weisselberg's rent, as well as his utility bills and parking garage fees, the indictment claimed. These benefits didn't stop at gratis living. Trump's company allegedly paid for the leases on 2 Mercedes-Benzes that Weisselberg and his wife allegedly used as their personal rides. Several of Trump's companies also gifted cash to Weisselberg during the holiday season so he could provide personal holiday gratuities per prosecutors' previous statements. Altogether, these plum perks amount to $1.7 million in untaxed benefits. Weisselberg pleaded guilty in August to a 15-count indictment involving these payouts, and he responded, "Yes, Your Honor," when Merchan asked whether he engaged in a scheme with the Trump Organization to defraud federal, New York State, and New York City tax authorities. Weisselberg's bombshell admission seemed to directly implicate Trump's businesses in criminal activity such as tax fraud and falsifying business records. Weisselberg testified for the prosecution at trial. The plea deal stipulated that he had to testify truthfully if called to the stand, and I guess maybe he has. Indeed, Weisselberg was the prosecution's star witness. Over several days of testimony, Weisselberg tied Trump's companies, and to some extent the ex-president himself, to illegal tax shenanigans. He said the rent was authorized by Donald Trump when asked about the free apartment. Weisselberg also told jurors that the Trump Corporation paid his utility bills there. "It's your understanding that was authorized by Mr. Trump?" Hoffinger asked. Weisselberg said, "That was my understanding, yes." Weisselberg also testified that Trump paid his grandchildren's private school tuition. Prosecutors contend this constituted a benefit that it should also have been taxed. Well, you know the background of all of this. But the most important part here is that as they are concluding things and winding up the closing arguments, you have essentially a picture being painted by the prosecution, which has the last word here, that this has all been done with Trump's assent, and this story that he was somehow blissfully ignorant of everything that went on at the Trump Organization is nonsense. And I think all the narratives we've heard up to date about how he handled issues like this at his companies belie the story that the defense is trying to build. But, we'll see whether the jury buys into any of it. Anyway, I just thought I would update you on where they are and what we can anticipate in the coming days. I guess a verdict in the case due at some point in the near future. We'll catch up with that when it happens. Tomorrow being Tuesday, we'll be speaking with Joan McCarter, senior writer, of course, at Daily Kos, who will come by and update us on what she's hearing about what's going on in Congress. I've got something both in the lame duck session and in the session to come beginning in January. I've got something parked here somewhere about some of the rules changes being proposed and considered, I guess, by both the, I assume mostly in the GOP conference, because they're going to be the ones setting the rules for the House. We'll see whether any of them are non-crazy, perhaps, and maybe discuss those with Joan tomorrow.
NetworksRadio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Well, thanks for sticking with us. Even though the leaf blowers were going crazy outside, they did eventually subside. So time now to hand things over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, where presumably there are no leaf blowers going. Lots to catch up on from around the country and around the world, as usual, all uninterrupted by whining in the background, except mine.